So, topic today, this is podcast 20, and this is Mike and Myke on Gripping Reality.
We're back.
We're gonna grip a part of reality that probably doesn't get talked about a lot, and that is how power functions in human organizations. Now, I suppose
Ooh.
in theory, a person on their own can have a power confluence, that there could be issues about power, but I find that unlikely. But any two human beings or more, there is going to be a power issue. And once it becomes organized from little children who are on the playground and there's 5 of them, one will take over. They'll be the boss. That child will run the game and determine who are the winners and who are the losers. I mean, there's going to be a human organization all the way up to corporations and associations, things that are formal or things that are informal. There is what we call the column of power that occurs within the organization. That's what we're going to talk about today, the column of power.
And this came out of our discussion, the last 2 discussions of sex in the church. And it's been fun to see a number of people actually look at it and watch what we're talking about.
Fun.
And
why do you say it's fun to watch? What is fun about that? Because over here on the East Coast, fun
is this a power thing?
Fun is the first syllable of funeral. So what is fun about this?
You East Coast people really need a life. It's just
we do.
sad.
So enlighten. This is fun. It's enjoyable.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's enjoyable to know that people are actually looking. I suppose, when you use the word sex, then people want to go, oh, I wonder what that's about. So
you're saying sex is fun. That's what you're saying.
Well, it's true. It is, but that's okay. We're not going there today.
No.
So I digress.
So it was out of that conversation. Get back on track.
Okay, column of power. How does that work? Okay, what does that look like? What do we mean by column of power? What that's like, okay, there's great guys, but what does that mean? How do you describe that?
One of our emotional systems we termed empowerment. It has the word power in it. And empowerment is everything from political and social ability to make your own decisions. That's called empowerment. There's all kinds of urban renewal stuff that has to do with empowerment programs. So we understand all that. Words are used in a variety of ways. We are using the word empowerment for the emotional system that includes anger, frustration, rage, annoyance, all those kinds of words that have to do with bringing about change or being in control of something. It has to do with control, change, winning, that kind of thing. So the empowerment emotions are our response or our reaction to perceptions of situations that need change, power, control, something. The emotion we have is some version of anger, mild, moderate, or extreme. The concept of power, though, is separate from the emotion of empowerment. Right. It's something that all human beings, every one of us, deals with within ourselves and within others all the time. It is a pervasive part of life. Power, as I define it, I'll try to boil this down as simple as possible, is to answer the who, what, when, where, how questions, the adverbial questions of a situation. When you can identify who makes a decision, how is it done, what are we going to do, when are we going to do it, how are we going to evaluate it, any kind of a question about an event, that person or that subset is the group that holds power. If you can decide What game are we going to play in the schoolyard today? Let's play Foursquare. No, let's play tag, and you're it. The person that makes that decision, if it's respected by everybody else, has the power. So some out of the center kid says, I don't want to play Foursquare. I want to play tag, and you're it. Everyone ignores that command, that instruction. That kid has no power, and everyone on the playground knows it.
Right.
Another kid, the star girl or the star boy, will say, after everybody says something or before anybody says something, it doesn't matter, says, we're playing tag today, and you're it. And everyone complies. That child is the one with power. Right. So you can spot it. They don't have to be angry. They don't have to appear mean. They could, but that's not the issue. Power is held by the person who sets policy other people have to follow or end up following.
And what happens many times is that people don't understand. They really don't see where the power lies. And coming with it, we've talked about formal and informal powers. So, for example, and I've heard this multiple times, and I've seen it in action multiple times over the life of my career in an organization, say in a company, in a corporation, in a church, school, or PTA or whomever,
neighborhood,
whatever, organization. There is the formal person who's the president, the person who's the CEO, the person that's the division manager. And many times that could be the same person that really holds the power in very different ways. But many times that's not what the person who holds the power. It's the secretary that holds the power.
Or the grandmother in the last pew.
Right. Or, the administrative assistant that holds the power. Been there through the last 6 guys that have come and gone over the last 15 years.
The longest term member who's been just loyal and hanging around for X years, longer than anybody else.
Right. And knows.
So how would that person, the secretary or the grandmother or the guy who's been loyal to the organization, how do they exhibit the power if they don't positionally have the power?
Well, it works in, I think, a variety of ways. One of them is, one of the ways they do it is very passively. So in other words, things that they don't agree with, the system or the order that's coming down, or they think that trying to make this change within the organizational structure, they delay it. They just don't initiate it. They
typically called passive aggressive behavior.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So they don't even, they go, oh, well, I'll get to this when I want to. And that may be the,
or they could say, oh, that is a great idea. We all need to jump on that, folks.
Exactly.
And then they do nothing. They just don't do it.
Right. So that's a true.
And so if accused, so you're undermining what we're doing here. No, I'm not. I'm completely on board.
Exactly. Or in volunteer organizations where someone does what you're saying, the grandma in the pew. Well, how does she have power? Well, because she talks. And, it doesn't matter what, the president says or the preacher says or whoever. She has all these connections and relationships because she's been in the lines.
To ask the question, how did the person who has power accumulate that power? That might be another podcast altogether, because how people accumulate power is different than recognizing they do accumulate power.
Right.
So the column of power is one aspect that we want to put some words to so that we can think about it in more clear terminology. We were talking in the last podcast about the column of power in churches that have to do with sexual matters. That was our particular topic. You want to see that, go back to podcast 18 and 19. We were talking about that. But the column of power is let's use for an example, people who are gay or lesbian, the LGBTQ kind of person, comes to visit at a church. And we're not saying what kind of church yet. They show up at church, they want to sit in a seat, they want to go there. And they may or may not give any kind of social cues or evidence that they are not heterosexual. Doesn't matter whether they do or they don't. But in their own understanding of themselves, they know where they are. So they come to an organization and they ask the system, a person sitting near them or somebody who's in a position of authority, am I allowed to come to church here? And the answer is, well, yes, of course, everybody can come to church here. So the column of power, at a point at which someone has no engagement other than tangential, just a very vague, single one-off moment, has no power, and the column of power says, oh, sure, everyone can come. Then the person, several days or weeks go by, and they continue to come to the church. Now, the column of power, they're moving up from a one-off to loyalty.
Right.
Repeated activity.
Right.
They're starting to come towards the column of power, but they're still at the base. Then they say, I'd like to join the church. What does membership do?
Right.
It's power.
Right.
You get to vote. You can hold certain positions. You can have an identity. The church begins to change its identity because now that person is a member, and the individual is seeking to go up the column of power. Who, what, when, where, why, how decisions are made. Membership have more than the guy who just shows up the first time or somebody who comes repeatedly but isn't really committed. They're going up the column of power. Then they say, hey, there are small groups in this church. I would like to be a part of a small group. You're moving up from sitting in a pew, sitting in a small group. That's up the column of power. Then after some time, I would like to be a leader of a small group. That's moving up the column of power. I would like to lead small groups. That's up the column of power even higher because you have more influence, more control over who, what, when, where, why, those kinds of questions. I would like to be licensed by the church for ministry. I would like to be ordained as an associate. I would like to be ordained as the senior pastor, and you move up the column of power. Now, as a person approaches the column of power, the stakes get higher, higher, and higher. And you can actually observe in human organizations, how does the column of power work?
Right. And what it does in the context of power then really comes back to, I would offer that it comes back to motivation within the column of power. What is the structure for? And in the reality then, to ask that, and people say, well, you got to stand for something. I'm going, well, that's not the issue here. The question is, what is the object of the column of power? What are you trying to do within your organization?
So go back to, you have to stand for something. What does that actually mean? You have to stand for something.
Well, I think in people's minds, I'm not sure that I have, saying it in that context, I would say that what happens is people lose sight of really the core values of what they're trying to accomplish.
But this can be a core value. They're trying to accomplish a set of standards that are inviolable. They're trying to preserve a definition of the church or of Christianity or of social appropriateness or something, there is some kind of a standard, and the organization, let's say it's a church, can say our purpose is to make sure that society does not change the standards to which we hold. Therefore, the column of power preserves those standards against all attacks. So they would regard a person who violates the code of standard as violating the column of power. I think that's how it happens. So if in one kind of church, sexual orientation is not part of their standard, then an individual who is gay or lesbian or non-sexual or multisexual or bisexual, doesn't matter, can move up the column of power without resistance from the column, because that organization has not established standards in sexual matters as essential or even important. However, another church organization, that could be the number one standard that represents worldliness and the devil and collapse of society. And so whether it really is or not is not nuclear weapons, and it's not police behaviors, and it's not wealth management, it is sexuality. When the organization says that, when it really believes that is our highest purpose, then a person who comes once and says, I'd like to sit in a pew, and they are wearing rainbow clothing, or they have a boyfriend with them, or a lesbian couple, and the church can say, don't come back, or they can make it so difficult that you are clearly not welcome here. We are not a welcoming church. We are a church with standards. Well, every church has standards. But the question then is, if the person is coming, the column of power then crushes every attempt to violate what the column of power says are the essentials or the purpose of the organization. And it's interesting to watch, and you might use the word fun.
So why do we use the column of power?
I think the idea of column is it's very defined, and it rises above the plane, holding something up over the top. So whether it's an umbrella or a roof or some kind of a protective shell, the column of power sees itself as suspending an umbrella over the organization, partly for its identity, partly for its protection, and partly for its advancement. So the column of power is there to make sure that the organization accomplishes its purpose and doesn't waver. And part of it is that column a singular column? There's really only one. Or does the organization have multiple columns of power, so that women's ministry is doing one thing and youth ministry is doing something, and worship, and they're not necessarily related, just they're all columns within the umbrella? The question then is, if youth ministry starts doing something that violates or changes the umbrella over the whole thing, which column of power is going to crush the youth ministry organization out of its existence because it's endangering what the central column of power sees as its own prerogative or its birthright? That is another fascinating aspect of this whole thing. So a column of power is definable. It's clearly separate from the normal course of the environment. It's centralized and it's observable. It also has a certain amount of strength and a certain amount of height. So in some organizations, the column of power is extremely short. There is everyone who comes, and there is the pastor and the board. That's it. Nothing. There's just one team, and they decide everything. Other organizations have committee after committee, a layer after layer after layer after layer. And you say, could I come rent a room for my daughter's bridal shower? That has to be in paperwork. Please go to this committee, then they'll pass it up, and it'll go to this committee, and it'll go to that committee, and you go up the column of power because there's all these different levels. And eventually somebody asks a question, who is the guy your daughter is marrying? And the person says, oh, my daughter's not marrying a guy, she's marrying a girl. Bingo. Immediately the column of power crushes everything below it. Or the column of power says, hey, great, that's what we're community oriented, and we don't really we don't have any policy about that. So it's not just that every single church in the world, or synagogue, or mosque, or whatever organization it's really transferable across the page, has the same column of power. It's that every organization has a column of power. And being able to spot what that is, think about it, and understand. Now, there are two questions that Myke and I ask over and over and over. Do you know what those two questions are? If you've watched more than one podcast, you've heard them. The column of power exists. What does it do to you?
And what are you going to do about it?
And what do you do with it, or what are you going to do about it? And
right.
So those two questions. So then you say, I am going to change the column of power. I'm going to fight. And I'm going to start at the bottom. I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to start in the middle. I'm going to set up separate columns of power. What does the column of power do? Oh, I can relax because they are going to protect my values. I'm going to fight. I am really mad. I am crushed. I cannot believe they did this to me. There can be all kinds of ways in which you say, this is what the column of power does to me. It rewards me. I'm at the top. Ha! Or I'm in the middle somewhere. I'm really comfortable being there. Or I'm in the middle, but I want to go up. Or I'm in the middle, I want to get out. What does it do to you? And then what are you going to do with it? What do you do with that column of power? Well, I'm going to run other people's lives. I'm going to make decisions that other people have to live by. I'm going to open up the walls and let the fresh air come in. You decide. What does it do to you? What are you going to do with it?
And when we talk about power, and we talk about the emotion of power, empowerment, we talk and define in the context of that this is about actually resolution that brings about change in organizations. And so the reason I think to some degree we're talking about this today is that people get caught up in this whole aspect of the power, the column of power, and they don't have any idea what to do with that. And they see power as being something that is not about bringing about resolve or about change. They see it more in the sense of deep control, of getting my way, that it's an ego builder. I mean, all kinds of things that fall into that. And, people would say, well, if you don't have someone in control, you don't have someone at the top, then what do you have? Well, yeah, I understand that. I understand organizational theory. I understand how, how community civilization work. But the question is, in this context, is what is this really? What is it doing to me? If I'm in this column of power and I'm stuck, or I am being crushed, let's take that side of it. What do I do with that? Because it's crushing me. So now, do I do the same thing? I just build a branch of column of power that is going to get big enough that it's going to tip the whole big column over. What does that look like in
mutiny?
Yeah,
of being a renegade.
anarchy, if you will, to some degree.
Okay.
You know, I mean,
all right. Initiating some kind of anarchy or lawlessness to violate the column of power, make it fall over.
isn't that what we've been seeing? We've been watching over the last how many months in so many different kinds of venues, from Black Lives Matter to COVID to, I mean, isn't that the kind of thing we've seen where people are saying, you know, I'm not going to let the column of power dictate what I'm doing. And so I'm going to go do this. But the result of that has, I would say, probably not been terribly positive overall.
But you can't say necessarily that it's been positive or negative because we don't really know ultimately what the real outcomes are going to be. In 20 years, we'll have the ability to look back and say in 2020 and 2021, the American culture changed because of the protesting and because of the various events that occurred, that people finally created a column of power that works for the majority of the population, but it was very painful to do so. Or in 20 years, we may find American society actually began falling apart. That was the crumbling of the column of power. It was replaced by nothing. So the reality is, to be able to say that it's not been good, we don't know if it's been good yet or not. Or in some individuals' lives, it has been very good that instead of just passively sitting back and letting things happen for which they disengage, but now they're engaged. And like any skill, it just takes practice to be engaged well.
Right.
We would say, well, that's actually really good, even though the immediate outcome has been difficult. So in the long run, it's very positive, while in the short term or in anecdotal issues, it's been tragic or difficult. But we don't know yet whether, and that comes back to one of our core concepts, is something automatically good or automatically bad. Interestingly, people say protesting is automatically bad. Right. Other people say, no. Protesting is automatically good. And it's neither automatically good or bad. What is it doing to you? What do you do with it? Those become the critical question.
Right. So let's take it out of the context of the volunteer church kind of setting.
Okay.
Column of power. Let's move into some other workaday world kinds of things. How this works within a job, within a company, within a school, within
a formal organization that has a hierarchy or a structure.
Right. It has a structure. What good does it really do for me to, this is nice to talk about this, but how does this help me be a better employee? How does this help me be a better boss? How does this help me be a better facilitator? I mean, why is this important to me? I mean, you guys are wandering all over the place here with this within the volunteer organization. I get that from a religious kind of perspective, but what does that have to do with just the general workaday world kind of thing?
Okay, so in today's economic world, we have a number of gigantically huge players like Amazon, UPS, FedEx, organizations that their primary identity is in moving products. Not that they produce them, they move them.
Right.
And so one of the issues that is arising right now in 2021 is, should a company like Amazon be unionized so that the workers can enter the column of power as participants in the column of power, setting salary, determining work hours, who is rewarded, who is not, how are managers identified, on and on and on. So that becomes a huge question. Should the worker be able to enter the column of power and move up that column? Or do the organizers of Amazon say, we move product, period? The faster you move as a delivery person, the more you are doing what we want.
Right.
And for somebody to say, wait a minute, quality of life, we don't enjoy our job. We're not happy right now. The
Right.
column of power says we are not existing for you to have a fulfilling life. We exist for you to move product and get it on a porch. So you run, and we're going to give each of our delivery people not 200 packages, which they can deliver in an 8-hour day in a reasonable pace. We're going to give them 350 packages. You can do it, but you run everywhere you go. And
Right.
if a person says, I don't want to spend my life running, the column of power can say, work somewhere else.
Right.
Don't work here.
Right.
Well, now in social systems, well, a company doesn't have the right to say to an employee, I'm not being fulfilled. Your job is to run. The ultimate question is, in the business world, does the participant at that level gain the power to redefine the purpose of the company? So the UPS driver, the FedEx driver, or whatever, do they have the power of determining who, what, when, where, why, in what fashion, all those adverbial questions? I only want to deliver 25 packages today. I want to talk with my customers. I want them to feel good about having their delivery. And I want to feel good about being able to do the delivery. And I would like flowers to grow around us.
Please stop. You're killing me. You don't do that. That's not your shtick.
And I just feel so good about being a delivery person. And the next person says, I delivered 850 packages while you delivered 250, and I made this company $70,000 today. So get out of my way.
No, that's more like you.
Right. So what's interesting is recognizing the column of power, that in some organizations, the value of the human experience of working there is high, and in other organizations, it's non-existent. And the question then is, what does that do to you, and what are you going to do with it?
Right.
So even in the area of business, competition, restauranting, school systems, educating children, caring for patients in medical facilities, all of those issues come to bear as both the people in the column of power and those who are receiving the impact of the column of power are engaging what's going on. So it's simple in one degree, and it's also incredibly complex in another degree at the same time.
And I think the point being here, and obviously the reason I asked the question and understanding is that one of the things that we endeavor to do, and in our trainings, when Why Do People Act That Way, we're producing right now some course material that are going to be launched here hopefully in a couple of months. One of our major goals in this is to give you, the listener and the viewer, tools to be able to start to identify what's going on around you. What we have found so much in our work and in our, over the years, our professional work, is that the people don't have the ability to be able to see what they're looking at, and they don't have any tools to identify that, to put actual language to it so it starts making sense. Our goal is to endeavor to help you view things in a different way so that you can answer those two diagnostic questions that are really critical in your own life, in being able to enhance your life, to be able to grow, to be able to make your life better, from the standpoint of what does that do to you and what are you going to do about it. Those two diagnostic questions can be used in every aspect of your life,
Right.
whether you're emotionally, physically, spiritually. I mean, all of those aspects, mentally, those two diagnostic questions,
Financially, in terms
financially,
of skill development,
all that
occupationally, pick
right.
any kind of aspect of life, those two questions really become operative. They really
Right.
can operate in such a way as to empower and enable a person
Right.
as they move forward.
But if you don't have some tools of trying to begin to understand, gets really difficult and confusing to try to answer those questions, because it's kind of like you're trying to build a house and you don't have any nails, and you don't have any, you don't have any the right kind of lumber, and you got a hammer, that's great, but you don't have the pieces you need to actually do the job. So when we talk about this aspect of the column of power, one of the things that we have discovered in our own lives, in our professional lives, is that when you can begin to identify this and you start looking at really what's going on around you. For example, back to our original concept or our description.
Wait a minute, finish your sentence. You just started a sentence and then interrupted with an illustration. When you finally can identify clearly, don't go to the example. What's the end of that sentence? When you start understanding clearly, then what? What were you going to say? Finish your sentence.
I love it when I do this to you. Then you can do something about it and realize
maybe
that well, you can start asking and answering those diagnostic questions. So, for example,
okay, I'm ready for the example now.
Okay, thank you.
That was bait on the hook. I'm ready to bite. Go ahead.
Good. Back to the issue of formal and informal power within an organizational structure.
Both of which can exist, right?
Exactly.
Formal and informal.
Exactly. They are parallel, they're vertical, whatever you want to say, but they're parallel many times. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into an organization or have gone to work for one, and within 2 or 3 days at the most, I can tell you who runs the place. And most of the time, it's not the formal person.
So if you can't tell me how many times you've done that, it's because you signed a DNA or do not disclose, or because you forgot and you don't really know? Why can't you tell me how many times? Because you never bothered counting them? What does that expression mean? I can't tell you how many times. It's like the expression, I could care less, meaning I care, but it's possible for me to care less. But that's not what we mean by I could care less. What we really should say is I couldn't care less because I'm at the bottom of caring. But that's another point altogether.
And I left you alone when you said gigantic, huge, okay? And you just went right on by, and I thought, I need to do
I
that.
Should have said big, huge. Yes. And I just slipped a should in there, which I should not say. Okay, so our next podcast, which is going to take off for this, we're actually going to translate the column of power into the issue of bullying.
Yes.
And what happens within the human experience, within community, within families, within organizations, in the world at large, on internet, when bullying takes place. But
Exactly.
we can't really talk about bullying until we've identified the column of power. That's why these two are going together. 20 and 21 are going to fit together like a hand in a glove, because the nature of the use of power, and subtly or obviously how it's played out, also pertains to bullying and being victimized by that. So these are actually going to tie together.
Right. So we really appreciate you watching today. This has been a lot of fun. I hope it's been
Fun.
helpful to you.
There you go again. That must be a West Coast thing. This has been fun. This has been challenging. This has been meaningful. This has been quite interesting. This has been boring. Anything but fun. So, okay. So this has been, I'm sorry I interrupted.
It's been a joy to be able to work with you today.
It has been delightful that you have not shut off your computer technology while we were talking.
So if they want to get a hold of us, where do they go, Michael?
Yeah, just don't bother anymore. You can send an email. If you want to complain, send it to Myke, spelled with an I, at GrippingReality.com. If you have anything complimentary to say, please shore up my deflated sense of self by writing to Myke with a Y at GrippingReality.com. And we'll share the information. So if you say to one of us, I am telling you something that I have never told anyone else, and don't share this with anyone else, don't bother writing. Because we're going to do it, share it between each other, and then we're going to talk about it in a future podcast. But other than that person, everyone else can write to us.
That's right. All right. Thanks again. I hope this has been helpful.
Probably not. But...